More and more people are driving electric vehicles, but the critical charging stations they need to keep moving aren't available everywhere. The Biden administration is working to fix that problem, pushing for 500,000 charging stations nationwide by 2030. As Josie Sturman discovered, until they're all built, drivers in many parts of the country may find themselves in a charging desert.
So see, here's where I was going. This is my parents.
Justin McCormick's trips to see family are a little bit longer since he moved from Arkansas to Austin, Texas. The electric vehicle he fell in love with was supposed to make getting back a little easier. But on a recent trip home, McCormick's car, which can usually find charging stations at the push of a button, couldn't track down any as his charge dwindled.
And so all of a sudden the battery was like, just kidding, we can't make it anymore.
He hit what's called a charging desert, an area with no public places for electric vehicles to plug in and recharge. Outside the East and West Coasts, they're fairly common. Our national investigative team analyzed charging station data from the Department of Energy, creating this heat map that shows chargers concentrated mostly in urban areas, with shortages plaguing much of Middle America.
That really creates like a lot of barriers that I think that people don't realize.
That national data analyzed by our team shows there are more than 53,000 public EV charging stations across the U.S. in places like convenience stores, parking garages, universities, even a zoo and a winery. But while California, New York, and Florida make the top three for most chargers, with thousands each, we also discovered there are 5 states with fewer than 100 stations total. Less than 15% of all public charging stations nationwide are DC fast, the quickest type that can charge 200 miles in a matter of minutes, while the vast majority of stations are level 2, where charging could take hours.
There is much more that needs to be done to strengthen the network.
It's work that's getting a boost from the federal infrastructure law that's channeling $5 billion over 5 years to a special program that'll help build out the country's EV charging network and eliminate some deserts. But with much of the focus on EVs so far centered on big cities and suburbs, Virginia Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger is fighting to make sure charger funding also makes its way to rural areas.
What do you think happens if rural communities are left behind when this money goes out?
It would be catastrophic. Those can be major drivers of tourism to rural and agricultural communities. We want to make sure that as someone's driving through, that they're not just having to hug the interstate because they think that that's where they're going to be able to find the charging station.
I think we have a real opportunity right now to make sure that rural communities aren't left behind. That's not a foregone conclusion.
But Emily Wurzbo with the Environmental Defense Fund says stakeholders have to get involved in the process now, because every state in the country is getting a piece of the charging program's pot and has to submit plans outlining how they'll spend it year by year. Right now, the work is focused on building out so-called alternative fuel corridors along some of the nation's busiest highways, putting fast EV charging stations every 50 miles, no more than a mile off the interstate. After that, Wurzba says states have more wiggle room to decide where stations could go off the beaten path.
The conversation is really geared towards making it work for the local community.
Justin McCormick knows what can happen when a community isn't fully charged with the stations a growing number of EV drivers need.
And it just kept saying negative, however many miles, negative, negative, negative.
Despite his experience in a charging desert, he's still positive about electric vehicles and hopes the network gets a boost before his next trip home.
That was Josie Sturman reporting. Rural underserved areas are also getting another opportunity to fund EV charging stations in their area. A $2.5 billion grant program specifically designed to serve those communities was unveiled this spring.